She called me that evening, her voice calm, steady. But there was something in it that made my heart forget what was right. The office was almost silent when the call came in. The rest of the team had left hours ago, leaving behind the hum of computers and the faint ticking of the wall clock. He sat under the pale light of his desk lamp, finishing up a presentation for his boss, when the phone lit up with a name he'd never expected to see. Mrs. Hassan. For a moment he just stared at the screen. His boss's wife had never called him before. She'd been at the company's dinners, polite and graceful, always smiling, that composed kind of smile that never gave too much away. The kind of woman who seemed to live in a different tempo than everyone else. Slower, calmer, like her silence said more than most people's words. He picked up, trying to sound casual. "Hello." Her voice came through soft but steady, with a warmth that instantly filled the sterile office air. "I'm sorry to call this late. Hassan left some documents at home that he needs first thing in the morning. Could you bring them by?" He hesitated. It wasn't unusual for his boss to forget things, but she could have called a driver. Something about the way she asked, not ordering, not requesting, just inviting, made it feel like there was more to it. "Of course," he said finally. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As he ended the call, he caught his reflection in the darkened window. Slightly nervous, slightly curious. He gathered the folder from his boss's desk, slipped it into his bag, and turned off the lights. The hum of the elevator felt louder than usual as it descended, the metallic echo syncing with his heartbeat. Outside, the city was washed in soft rain. Streetlights reflected in the wet asphalt, turning every puddle into a flicker of gold. He drove slowly, the wipers brushing rhythmically, and somewhere between the traffic lights and the low jazz on the radio, his mind began to drift to her. He remembered the way she'd looked at the last company dinner. Not directly at him, but through him, as if noticing something in his silence that mirrored her own. A fleeting moment, but one that had lingered longer than it should have. The closer he got to her house, the more his chest tightened. It wasn't just about delivering papers anymore. There was an energy around the thought of seeing her, the kind that feels both wrong and inevitable. He turned into the narrow lane leading to the Hassan's home. The porch light was already on, a soft amber glow spilling onto the wet steps. He parked, cut the engine, and for a few seconds just sat there, the sound of rain filling the space around him. He could still hear her voice replaying in his head, calm, polite, with that slight pause before she'd said his name. A pause that made it sound less like a request, and more like a reason. He took a breath, stepped out of the car, and started walking toward the door, unaware that this small, simple errand was about to change everything. The rain had softened to a mist by the time he reached the front steps. Each droplet clung to his coat, glimmering faintly under the porch light. The house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels watched. He hesitated before ringing the bell, noticing how the warm light seeped from the edges of the curtains, how it made the rain outside look almost silver. He pressed the bell once. The sound echoed faintly inside. A few seconds passed, long enough for his heartbeat to feel loud in his chest, before the door latch clicked. She opened it slowly. For a moment, neither of them said a word. She stood there, framed by the light behind her, dressed in a soft beige cardigan that hung loosely off one shoulder, her hair tied up casually, a few strands falling free. She looked comfortable, unguarded, as if the house itself breathed with her. And in that instant, all the tension he'd carried from the office seemed to dissolve into the quiet warmth of her presence. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You came." He nodded, managing a polite smile that didn't match the storm in his chest. "You said it was important." "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The scent hit him first, jasmine, tea, something faintly sweet that lingered in the air. The living room was softly lit, the kind of lighting that makes everything look gentler. A few framed photographs lined the shelves, her with her husband at events, family gatherings, vacations. But the photos were neat, almost staged. None of them captured the softness of the woman standing before him now. She gestured toward the couch. "You can leave the documents there." He placed the folder on the table but didn't sit. The silence stretched again. Not awkward, just full. He caught her glance, quick and deliberate, as if she was measuring whether to say something more. "Would you like some tea?" she asked finally. He hesitated. "It's late." Her smile deepened slightly, almost teasing. "Then just one cup." He nodded. "All right." She moved toward the kitchen. Slow, graceful, each movement deliberate. The faint click of porcelain and the sound of water boiling filled the quiet. He stood near the window, watching the rain trail down the glass, feeling the warmth of the house settle around him. When she returned, she handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed, lightly, unintentionally, but long enough to make him feel it all the way up his arm. Her hand was warm, steady. "Thank you," he said softly. She met his eyes then, not as her husband's employee, but as someone who'd arrived exactly when she needed to not be alone. In that look there was no guilt, just something fragile and unnamed, and before he could find words for it, she smiled faintly, turned toward the window and said quietly, almost to herself, "It's strange how some nights don't go the way you expect, yet feel like they were always meant to." The steam curled gently from their cups, thin wisps dissolving into the golden light between them. He sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders slightly tense, unsure whether to relax or keep his professional distance. She sat across from him, one leg folded under the other, her hands wrapped loosely around her cup as though it was there to steady her. At first, the conversation was ordinary, safe. She asked about the office, the project deadlines, whether her husband had been overworking him again. He smiled faintly and told her it wasn't so bad, though they both knew it was. She listened, nodding with genuine attention. Not polite attention. Real attention, the kind that made him feel like every word he said mattered. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked suddenly, her voice softer now. He looked up. "Of work. Of pretending you're fine," she said. The question caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing people usually asked. It wasn't small talk. It was an invitation. He hesitated before answering. "Sometimes. But I guess everyone pretends, don't they?" She smiled gently, her eyes lowering to her cup. "Some of us are just better at it." He noticed then the faint weariness in her eyes. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of quiet acceptance that had settled there over time. The kind that comes from living too long in half-light. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the room, soft and constant. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that holds truth. He found himself studying her, the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, how her gaze drifted toward the window as if watching something far away. There was elegance in her stillness, but also loneliness. The kind he recognized too easily. "You're different from how I imagined," he said before realizing he'd spoken aloud. She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "And how did you imagine me?" He swallowed, careful now. "I thought you'd be colder, distant. You always seem that way at the office." Her lips curved into a half-smile. "It's easier to be distant when everyone expects you to be perfect." He nodded slowly. "You don't have to be." Her eyes met his and something shifted. The air between them grew still. It wasn't about the words anymore. It was about the quiet understanding that passed without them. She looked at him as though seeing someone who hadn't learned how to build walls yet. And he looked at her as though seeing someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to take them down. Then she laughed softly, a sound he'd never heard from her before. It wasn't polished, not the polite kind. It was warm, real, almost shy. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured, but her tone lacked warning. "Why not?" She held his gaze a heartbeat longer. "Because some truths sound too kind to believe." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a reminder that the night wasn't done with them yet. The rain had deepened into a steady rhythm against the glass, a quiet percussion that filled the spaces between their words. The teacups sat forgotten on the table now. Their conversation had drifted beyond polite edges into something unguarded, something fragile. She leaned forward, reaching for a photo frame on the shelf beside her. "Do you know when this was taken?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost fond. He glanced at it. A smiling couple at a beach resort, her husband's arm draped casually around her shoulders. She looked younger there, sunlight caught in her hair, her laughter frozen mid-breath. "I don't," he admitted. "5 years ago," she said, setting the frame in his hands. "We were happy then. Or maybe just pretending better." He studied the picture. "You don't look like you're pretending." She smiled faintly. "That's the thing about photographs. They don't capture silence. They only show the moments we want to remember." Her fingers brushed his as she took the frame back. It was a simple, fleeting touch, but it landed with quiet weight. His pulse skipped. Not because of the contact itself, but because she didn't pull away right away. Her hand lingered against his for a second too long, skin warm and delicate. She noticed it too. A small pause filled the air, tender and uncertain. Then she set the photo down, almost carefully, as if breaking that touch required intention. "Sorry," she murmured. He shook his head. "Don't be." The silence returned, thicker this time, but not heavy. It was a silence filled with heartbeat and breath, with all the things neither dared to name. He could hear the faint rustle of her sweater as she crossed her arms, maybe out of instinct, maybe to stop herself from reaching again. She moved closer, sitting beside him on the couch, just close enough for him to feel the warmth radiating off her. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them doing anything. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "I miss how it felt to be noticed without needing to ask for it." He turned toward her. "You don't have to ask." Her eyes met his then, calm, searching, with a depth that made him forget what he was supposed to say next. The light from the lamp caught in them, soft amber glints flickering like candlelight. Felt wrong to look too long. Felt impossible to look away. A single drop of rain slipped down the window, catching the glow from the lamp before vanishing into the darkness outside. He followed its path absently, anything to stop his thoughts from tumbling further. She sighed softly, breaking the silence. "It's getting late," she said, but she didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. A touch, a look, a heartbeat, and the unspoken realization that they were standing on the edge of something that neither of them had meant to find. Then she smiled, a small, wistful curve of her lips. "You should probably go soon," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound like she meant it. The rain had stopped, but the quiet after it felt louder somehow. A stillness that pressed gently against the walls. She sat back, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular, as if the air itself had taken on weight. He wanted to speak, to fill the silence with something that would make sense of the moment, but the right words didn't come. She broke it first. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "how two people can share a house and still feel miles apart?" He looked at her, not out of curiosity but out of concern. "Every day," he said honestly. "In different ways." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You're too young to say things like that." "Maybe," he replied, "or maybe I've just seen it enough to recognize it." Her eyes lifted to meet his. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was charged, alive. Every unspoken thought seemed to hang there, shimmering in the faint golden light. "I used to think marriage was about understanding," she said after a long pause. "But it's more about habit. Two people getting used to silence." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounds like it's meant to keep the tears away. "And silence can be kind for a while, until you start to need something more." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "What is it you need?" She studied him for a moment. To feel seen again, not as someone's wife, not as someone's responsibility, just as a person. Her honesty hit him like a slow wave. He didn't know how to respond, not without revealing too much. But something in his chest stirred, a quiet ache that felt both wrong and true. He reached for his cup, just to keep his hands busy. The tea had gone cold. "You deserve that," he said finally. "To be seen." Her gaze softened. "And you?" she asked gently. "What do you deserve?" He thought about it. The long nights at the office, the quiet drive home to an empty apartment, the way her voice had felt like warmth on the phone earlier that evening. "Maybe to feel enough," he said after a moment. They both smiled, small and sad. It was then that lightning flashed outside, white and brief, painting the room in a wash of silver. For a split second, the distance between them vanished. They both flinched at the thunder that followed, instinctively turning toward each other. Her hand rested on his arm, not planned, not even thought through. It was simple, natural, the kind of touch meant to steady both of them. The warmth of her fingers sank through his sleeve. His breath caught. Neither moved. That touch, quiet, almost reverent, said more than any confession could. It wasn't about desire, not exactly. It was about recognition, about finding something human where neither expected it. Then, slowly, she withdrew her hand. Her voice trembled slightly when she said, "You should go before this means something it shouldn't." He wanted to answer, but she was already looking away. And for the first time that night, he understood the hardest line to cross is the one you've already felt in your heart. The thunder rolled away, fading into a distant hum, leaving behind only the faint drip of rain from the eaves. The air inside the house had grown warmer, heavy with words that had already been said and the ones they were both trying not to. She stood up first. The movement was slow, deliberate, like she was trying not to disturb something fragile in the room. Her cardigan slipped slightly from one shoulder, and she drew it back up with an absent gesture. He watched her, silent, his chest tight with everything unsaid. "I didn't mean to keep you so long," she said, her voice almost apologetic. He smiled faintly. "You didn't." She gave a quiet laugh that barely reached her eyes. "You're kind, but you should go. It's late." He didn't move. He wanted to, he knew he should, but something in her tone made him stay. She wasn't asking him to leave. She was asking him to understand. The silence stretched again, this time soft, almost tender. It was the kind of silence that holds emotion too delicate for words. She looked at him then, really looked. Her gaze moved slowly across his face, lingering just a heartbeat too long, as if she wanted to memorize something before it was gone. Then, without a word, she stepped closer. Her hand reached out, hesitated in midair, then rested gently on his arm. Just that, nothing more. The touch was light but grounding, her thumb brushing once, absently, against his sleeve. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt enormous. The kind of touch that says, "I see you." I wish this were simpler. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Every nerve in him felt tuned to that single moment. The warmth of her skin, the closeness of her breath, the quiet ache of restraint. When she finally let go, he felt it as an absence, a coldness that filled the space where her hand had been. She stepped back, and something in her face shifted. A faint, bittersweet calm replaced the flicker of longing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For almost meaning it," she said, her eyes glistening under the light. He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to apologize, that what they shared wasn't wrong, just human. But his throat felt tight, his thoughts caught somewhere between guilt and gratitude. She turned toward the door, her voice steadier now. "Thank you for bringing the documents. And for staying a while." He nodded, but the words came out softer than he meant. "Anytime." Their eyes met one last time. No promises, no confessions. Just two people standing on opposite sides of something that could never be spoken aloud. Then she smiled. Small, sad, and beautiful. "Good night." He stepped back, letting the night air in as the door opened. Cool wind brushed against his face, carrying with it the scent of jasmine from her garden. The same scent that would stay with him long after he left. He didn't look back until he reached his car. Through the window, he saw her silhouette standing by the doorway, still, silent, framed in the golden light, as if she too couldn't quite let go. The rain had stopped completely now. The air outside carried that faint, clean scent that only comes after a storm, cool, quiet, forgiving. He stood by his car for a moment, the key in his hand, watching the light spilling from the house like a promise he wasn't meant to keep. Through the window, he could still see her. Faintly, just a silhouette framed in soft gold. She hadn't moved much since he'd left. One hand rested lightly against the curtain, as though she were holding onto something invisible. It wasn't longing. It was something gentler, the ache of connection that knows its own boundaries. He opened the car door, but he didn't start the engine right away. The air inside felt still, filled with the scent of rain and the memory of her touch. Every moment of the night replayed in fragments. Her voice on the phone, the sound of her laughter, the way her hand had lingered on his arm. Each one left a mark he knew he'd carry quietly, privately. Inside the house, she moved slowly toward the window. She watched him through the thin veil of glass, her breath fogging the surface slightly. The porch light haloed him in silver, and for a fleeting second, she wished he would look back, just once. But he didn't. Not yet. She smiled faintly at that. He was careful, kind. Always had been. He sat there for a long moment, listening to the ticking of the dashboard clock. Then, almost unconsciously, he turned his head, and their eyes met through the glass. The world went still again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was two souls recognizing each other, silently promising to remember without regret. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if to say thank you. For the tea. For the honesty. For the moment that neither of them would ever name. Her lips parted, just barely, forming the ghost of a smile. And then she stepped back from the window, the curtain falling gently into place. The light dimmed behind it, leaving only the faint glow of the porch to mark where she had been. He started the car. The engine came to life with a low hum, grounding him back into reality. The road stretched ahead, glistening under the fading streetlights. As he drove away, the reflection of her house disappeared in the rearview mirror, but not the feeling it left behind. Some goodbyes don't need words. Some are made of silence, restraint, and the quiet courage it takes to walk away from something that felt almost right. He breathed out slowly, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. The city lights blurred slightly through the windshield, not from rain this time, but from the weight of something beautifully unresolved. He didn't know if he'd see her again. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. But as he turned the corner, a soft voice echoed in his memory. Her voice, saying, "Some nights don't go the way you expect, yet feel like they were always meant to." And in that truth he found both ache and peace. Because sometimes, love isn't about staying. It's about knowing when to leave, while it still means something.